Good morning and welcome to this lovely Thursday and somewhat chilly morning here down in the Western Cape. This morning in today's Expert Insight webinar, over the next 45 minutes, we're going to be talking about property technology as it applies to residential community living and property developments. We are very excited today to have the South African Property Technology Association with us, represented by Wayne and Sean, and they'll be introducing themselves and what the association means a little bit later on. Before we get there, just to quickly run through a bit of housekeeping. I'm sure many of you have attended webinars by now, but just so you know, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little box called chat. Please feel free to put your questions to the team here. This is almost like a consultancy, a session. So any questions that you might have that are applicable, please put them in the chat and we will do our best to address them. During the course of the webinar, we will have a couple of poll questions come up. So when you see the question, it'd be fantastic if you can answer. Once you've answered it, you can click on the red button and take it away, and you'll see ones come up in front of you now. And then you can just remove it. The panelists can just remove it as well by clicking on the red corner of the screen. So property technology. Now, what we have seen within residential community living over the last sort of 12 years or so is this shift in creating technology solutions that help with the efficiencies of running an estate. And, 12 years ago, and at that stage, a lot of the communication or a lot of the technology was coming in through the security sector. As security companies were bringing in sort of almost military grade type solutions, they were introducing technology, AI, and other forms of ways in which we could monitor and control access into residential communities. But this has definitely changed, and we see technology companies taking over the space and introducing technology solutions that look more at both the management. So outside of just the security needs, we look at communication, smart solutions, and a number of other types of needs that are required by community spaces. So, but how do you choose which technology to use? How do you choose what's best for your particular estate? And I think that's what we really hope to unpack here this morning. So let me hand over to our panel so that they can just quickly introduce themselves so that we know everyone who's here today. So Wayne, if I can just ask you to introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little bit about SA PropTech.
Hi guys, my name is Wayne Berger. I'm the managing partner of iShack Ventures and the chairman of iShack Digital Consultancy, where we consult on digital transformation, as we will be doing today in the PropTech sector. Myself and Sean are co-founders of PropTech Africa, where we set out to educate, connect, and grow the South African PropTech industry, and we sort of put a spotlight on the industry and adoption relating to the industry.
Thanks, Wayne. Sean?
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks so much to Estate Living for inviting us. I think it's going to be a great conversation. So I'm Sean Godoy. So my day job, I'm Managing Director of Diversity Property Solutions, and we look at things like market analysis and strategy for investors and developers, and also helping property stakeholders develop an innovation strategy and try understand what's out there and if they need it in terms of PropTech, and also just doing things differently. Sometimes technology is not always involved. And as Wayne said, we're both co-founders of SA PropTech and then PropTech Africa, which is the umbrella organization with some regional partners on the continent.
That's great. Yeah, I think, and Property Tech is an association, so it welcomes other property companies into membership of the association. So I think let's just start off with a really sort of simple, basic question. Bearing in mind that our audience is a mix of residential community managements, developers, property technology companies themselves, I think that if we start at the beginning, I think the initial thing is to establish why an estate should have a digital portal, and what would that role or the goal of that digital portal be? And maybe, Sean, this is kind of a market analysis of a trend-based question. So why do you feel you've seen the shift into the space by technology companies?
Yeah, sure. I think PropTech basically just at a high level plays in a few different categories and different parts of the value chain. So, there's transaction and investments. So this is obviously after complex has been completed, and a big category is property management and services, where there's a lot of admin intensive, a lot of high volume queries, etc., around managing a property. And when you move to a complex or an estate, there's obviously multiple residents. There's a big need for clear communication and, I guess, accountability and transparency. So, sort of digitizing that and having a platform which records and facilitates different types, whether it's reporting maintenance issues or obviously helping body corporates and trustees fulfill their duties. That's another side of it, through communication and arranging AGMs, etc. I think that's quite important. And then obviously security requires a lot of communication and sort of giving access, this type of thing. So I think just the nature of running an estate with, having your estate manager, building manager, the trustees, the managing agents, and then obviously at the end of the day, the residents. There's just a lot of moving parts and a lot of areas that can be simplified, or, efficiencies can be improved. So it goes through to the residents, and then obviously you get property or building specific platforms as well, which is the next step. Monitoring maintenance, implementing the maintenance plans, which are obviously required by legislature, that type of thing. So I think at a high level, it has a big place to play, obviously, in driving efficiency and, making things a bit easier at the end of the day for residents and those interested in managing the estate.
So we understand, so the technology system, whether it's a portal or app or however that system there is, to manage and house information that is then shared where it's required throughout the estate, which does kind of lean itself to the fact that the information that's placed into the portal, the capturing of that information accurately, it plays a vital role, and all the capturing of that information plays a vital role. So if we look at that point in the process, the development of a portal versus an app, what is the best solution when it comes to capturing and storing and maintaining the data that sits behind the app or the portal?
Well, I mean, from our side, just on the previous question, I would say the reason you adopt PropTech is to make your life easier, better, more efficient. Should you be a user or should you be a manager of a residential community? And if it's not doing that for you, then you need to question why you are adopting PropTech. Then the next thing is, when you consider your data, it's great to have a lot of data, but if you're not, producing meaningful reports from your data, then why do you need that data? It's very important that you should have, let's say, a data plan, and with that data, you would have an idea of how you would, let's say, improve your estate or improve the lives of your community with that data. On a more technical note, or let's say more even practical note, what happens is that people can have multiple databases in their community. And the problem with that is that you can start to get data inefficiencies and data redundancies where you update one database and not another database. So ideally, the first step of let's say, organizing your community's data and your community's PropTech is having a centralized database or centralized dashboard where you're going to pull meaningful information or reports from the community or for the community.
So Wayne, then you talk about having a centralized database. So would you say that if you've built a portal, if you have a portal, you've had an estate portal for a number of years, it's working. Should you then now go and develop an application that can then be downloaded on everybody's phone? Or can that estate portal not become more mobile friendly and enable people to continue using what they've got?
Well, it's very important to consider costs and also maintenance costs of, let's say, building an app, for instance. A lot of people talk about having an app or a super app in that, but really it should be a platform that does something. That one of the ways that you engage with that platform is through an app. So every community is different. You get benefits from having a native or React Native app. That's just let's say, a good way to build your apps. And there's also benefits to just having web and mobile friendly platforms. So depending on your budgets, depending on your actual requirements, depending on your community, you have to make those calls on multiple variables. So the real answer is that it depends, and it really depends on your budgets, timelines, and actual plans for usage.
So,
just to jump in there, there's obviously those technical requirements, and the other thing is the kind of diverse nature of residents in a complex, perhaps even if it's a bigger one. So it's meeting them maybe at their understanding, or considering people have different, sort of technology literacy in terms of how they use. So, you might want, maybe downloading an app is maybe beyond a few people. So perhaps a web-based portal might be more applicable. I mean, where I live, there's a lot of older residents. So it's another consideration. It can be a bit of a hurdle. So perhaps, considering that user friendliness and accessibility is also quite important.
I just don't understand the difference. So I'm going to use a scenario here. I have a residential community that we work with. The community is a large community. It has two sides to the community. So one side is fully developed of approximately 350 homes. The other side is under development, approximately 150 homes and building. They have a portal that they use, and there they are using that to share the information around levies and access control, etc. But what this particular estate is looking for is the opportunity for the homeowners and residents to become more engaged in the estate. So, for example, what we mentioned earlier, snags. They want the estate management to be, the homeowners, when they're walking around the estate, it's a vast tract of land. If they see something, they want to be able to take a photo and record that particular issue and send it through to the homeowners association to fix. Now, is that something that's achievable by having a mobile friendly portal, or do you need an application specifically to be able to drive that type of functionality?
So the truth is that you can still do that with a mobile and web platform or infrastructure. The reality is that it's a much better experience on a native or React Native app. And because of that experience, so do we find there's more adoption. So there's also more functionality available. Just for interest's sake, generally apps, especially now in 2021, if it's a well-built app, and I just want to give an example on apps. There was a time where all the banks and everybody was saying, we've got a super app. I guess they still do it today, and it's the best app because it's got all the features. But the reality is that apps are better when they are like one function solution. So for instance, Uber has Uber Eats, but in my Uber app, I'm going to push a button, the car's going to pick me up, and it's going to take me somewhere. That's it. I'm not going to get the weather. I'm not going to see what my friends are up to. And when I want to order food, I open up Uber Eats and I go into Uber Eats, and then I can go order. It's one company with two different apps. Why I'm putting that out there is that you need to really consider adoption of your technology. And if you put too many features up front into the app or into your community platform, you might find that you get less adoption. So if it's specifically about snags and taking pictures and sending inspections, there's a good chance that that community, depending on their size and what other requirements they have, would have some sort of, I want to use the word basic, but apps are generally not basic. Actually, less is more. So a more basic app that solves that problem, as opposed to solving all your problems. I hope that makes sense.
So it's about identifying what the first core needs are. So and generally, as we know, the first thing one requires on an estate is generally access control. Now, not everybody uses an access control system. Not everybody that has an app has the same access control system through that app. And but access control generally is a good driver. Then what are you saying? You then say, the next thing I need to introduce is people to view and access their levies off their app. So I introduce that functionality that becomes the hero function for a period of time before I introduce the next function, which is perhaps then a communication-based function, and then the snags and then the utilities. So if you're rolling out your app's functions like that, you still at the end of the day will have an app that has 5 or 6 or 7 integrations. Is that correct?
Well, there's a choice that you make. You can decide, do you want to integrate or do you want to just have separate standalone apps? Right now, where I'm sitting, the access control happens through an SMS. You don't necessarily need an app to do it. You can have an app doing other functionality, but when I let people in, I'm using an SMS to give access. I'm just putting it out there. Generally, integrations can become expensive. There are different ways to integrate. There's also manual ways to integrate, but ideally, if you are a big community and you are serious about being proactive, innovative in the estate space, then ideally you want to have one system. It doesn't have to have your branding. I don't believe that. Maybe it's cool and it maybe gives your community a bit of prestige, but I'm not necessarily sure that it's going to give you the value that you need. But ideally, if you are innovative, forward thinking, you want to be able to put all your information on one dashboard. And that means integrating with all the different elements with one central system, which is for that type of thinking community that has the budgets to do that.
Just to jump in there, I think.
Yes.
Sorry, it's a really good point Wayne makes. So the best app isn't the one with like the most bells and whistles. It really has to, I suppose, relate to what your needs are, and perhaps there's pain points, something we like to say quite a lot within your complex and how you're running it. So perhaps you've got, like Wayne said, a access control system that's running and that's working well, but then you have an issue getting tenants feedback on certain things or responding and receiving important communication like planning the AGM or like the bringing on the maintenance issues. So I guess it's important to think about exactly what you need for your purposes and not to put unnecessary things on, because it gets noisy, and like Wayne said, the adoption and usability perhaps gets a bit watered down. And I guess also how you structure it, I was just thinking, perhaps you have when you open the application or the web portal, there's specific things for you. So that could be viewing your levies, paying your levies, also arranging your prepaid utilities and payments around that. And then there may be things also booking facilities, perhaps in the estate, etc. And then there could be more public things, so announcements from estate manager, from trustees, etc. So perhaps if you clearly define these things, but not overdo it, it can also help on that usability, because you have to put yourself in the shoes, obviously, of your users. At the end of the day, they're going to have to find the value, and they're the ones that matter. So on one side, on your kind of marketing, you might like to say, like Wayne says with the banks, we have a super app or something. So it looks good on that, perhaps on when you're promoting your image and you're on top of trends, but it's your users at the end of the day that really make a difference. And often like to think, like in the property management space, your residents or your tenants are your customers, basically, and you've got to think of that customer experience. And also, coming back to trends, it's, perhaps consumer trends and the way people want to interact with services, etc. So on one hand, like I said, make it accessible for those whose, technology literacy is perhaps a bit less, but also understand what people are demanding in terms of when they're interacting with services or service providers, etc. So yeah, just some extra considerations there.
I think it does make the situation more complex when you bring into the level of understanding of technology. And some estates and some communities do have a significantly older generation that are active within their communities and have a slight sort of technophobe. But by the releasing of different functions slowly into the community, one does kind of start overcoming some of those technology stumbling blocks. If I talk a little bit about the back-end stuff and the relationships between the different technology service providers. As you mentioned, nothing, especially estates that have been around for a little bit longer or a little bit smaller and they don't have these huge budgets, nothing came all at the same time. It's almost like they end up kind of putting their system together by bringing in different systems that they might already have in place. So how do the relationships on the back end between the different service providers work? And if I select to choose a portal or application portal that enables me to integrate, who manages those relationships and that integration?
Okay, so just to also answer Adrian in the thread is, I agree. I believe that an integrated solution, because obviously it relates to this question, an integrated solution is best. You want to have all your information in one space. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need one app. I'm just putting that out there because people or one platform. The point is that they need to be integrated through what's called API or software APIs or software developers kits, or any way that two systems can talk to each other. Most important is that all your information is centralized. Now, from our side, we also agree that you want to have as many features and functionality in one place for an estate or for a community, if possible, because the more information that you can gather from different sources, the more valuable it is. And when you're looking for a system, let's say, once again, we're talking to a diverse group of body corporates. If you're looking for a new system, try find a system that is easily integratable. That meaning that other systems can integrate. That means it's got an API or SDK, or they've got some sort of plan on how they would integrate with external systems. The next thing to consider is, what system can you start sort of immediately? You don't have to have all the functionality working from day one. This now relates to I think Natasha mentioned they have an issue relating to their adoption. Now, when you put too many features first up with to people in general, it becomes intimidating and then you get less adoption. The idea is to try give each feature, each functionality in your application the time to be the champion, and a time just for people to get comfortable with. That I feel is very important, because there's no use having all the bells, all the whistles, all this great functionality, but no one's really using that. And that's something that we see that happens a lot. So if you consider innovation and you consider adoption, you should think of the concept of gradually and then suddenly. You just have to take Your community just has to take a small little step towards technology in one area or another, and keep taking those small steps. And before you know it, you're fully integrated into an application. Just to give a practical example, I'm just going back to Uber, because there was a time where Uber was a strange concept, and then maybe you used it once or maybe twice, and now all of a sudden people are getting rid of their cars and working out, do they need a car, and all these sort of questions. So consider gradually, then suddenly, and just sort of start off with the most basic, most important feature, and get that adoption on. And then when you feel comfortable, start to release more information. It's very, easy to say. A lot of you guys are deep in with your systems. You've got a lot of people using it, but then maybe just put the spotlight on these individual features to your community and try and increase your engagement.
It's quite an interesting, I like that idea. Put a spotlight to one. So have your, have you used your snag feature this month, and have communication around it, explanations, video, everything about that particular feature, and keep marketing that particular feature. So you've now looking for, you've got your system. Again, I still am sitting on the fence about whether you've got a portal that's mobile friendly, or if you've gone and white labeled an application. I like the flash of an application, but one always goes back to thinking that Facebook's not an app. Facebook's a portal. So, and it can do so much. So it does kind of like, anyway, it puts you on the fence here. So you've got, but let's say you get an app and you decide to use one. And now, do you go and reinvent the wheel and decide to build an application specific to your estate, or do you white label something that's already out there, or do you just use what you've got, what is out there, without white labeling it? Who's going to answer?
Well, yeah, I'm happy. So look, if you are experienced with technology, then you will understand that there are so many ways that you can fail and start again. So if you want to be a technologist and you are willing to fail and spend money for things that don't work out, this is just the nature of the game, then you can consider the option of building your own. Otherwise, what I would recommend is doing a Google search, asking friends what solutions do they use and what's out there, and try to see if there's a sort of quick route to market for your initiative. And the thing is that you don't necessarily want to white label the app. You ideally could just customize the app, meaning that you put your community in that brand of whatever app it is. If I'm using app because we keep alluding to the word app, but more it's the sort of community management platform. And it's only for me, it's a nice to have, not a have to have when you have your own branding on an app. It's also something that you can do later. Most service providers, you can ask them, you can say, look, can I use the system? And if it makes sense for us to go and brand the app, do you offer white label services? And then that's something that you can always address later. Just a comment on Facebook. Facebook, as you mentioned, is a platform, but it is delivered through an app. It is more of an app today. There's more mobile views than web views, and most likely you're going to find that just the adoption of mobile apps is just growing. So at some point, if you are a big community and you are looking to be innovative and you want to get more adoption, then I do believe that an app is a good idea. What I don't believe is that a branded app is a good idea to kick off with, unless it's in your sort of community ethos that you do want your own brand, and then I can understand that.
Just to jump in there as well, I totally agree with Wayne's points, and you've got to again really think of a specific need that is present, in managing your complex, and perhaps your residents have specific needs. But there's a big, Wayne knows more about kind of, building a bespoke system or using something that's out there, whether you white label it or not. But just in the wider scope, like, we've got such a large and kind of robust sectional title home ownership kind of set up in our residential market. I mean, if you look back like 20 years, in the last 20 years, and like if you look at the new residential development that's been delivered, I mean, a big proportion is is sectional title or other sort of complex structures. So it means we've got like a whole specialized subsector. And in terms of PropTech, you see there are a lot of specific products that are that have been developed and focused on this market of running a complex, from both the estate manager and the residents themselves. So on that hand, if you don't want to sort of reinvent the wheel, and it's probably more cost effective, there are some people who've given a lot of thought to what the needs are. And obviously there's another thing, whether you're small or large in terms of your complex, there are some standard elements that everyone deals with. So, a sort of a ready-made product can address perhaps a lot of things that are common to all these complexes. So, and especially if it's a new thing for you and your residents, there are, if you do your kind of research and due diligence, there are some really good products out there. And if you find the right people, they can kind of give you insight, perhaps help you with training. So it's just important to know there are some really good things out there, and we're seeing some quite exciting activity in the specific space. Yeah.
So, and I think a lot of that growth that we've seen from adoption has come post-COVID. I mean, going into the pandemic, the states, the communities that didn't have a clear communication structures in place did really struggle, and also digital allowing digital communication within their MOIs and allowing for digital AGMs and things like that had to be worked into their MOIs, and that is another thing that's being looked at and included, when we go moving into 2021-22. So I understand, I understand the need, and I think that most estate management understands the needs. They struggle perhaps with the adoption, the engagement, choosing the right service provider, bringing in the services. It takes time and effort and resources that they don't necessarily always have on hand to be able to adopt the new technologies into the communities. Now, we have seen a lot of growth over the last few months in this market, and a lot of that has come around with the facial recognition technology, touchless, access and exit. And so if you had an app in place, I mean, how do you make a decision that this type of technology will be able to grow with the needs of your community? Is there a way in which, I know you mentioned that there should be it should allow API integration, but what other types of methods of control can you identify to make sure that you will evolve as your consumer needs evolve, and not too expensively to put it out there?
Yeah, just quickly, I think Wayne's well placed to jump in on this one, but it's interesting, like you said, how things in the last 18 months or so have changed quite rapidly. So just again, to use my experience in my complex and like as a trustee, so our building is older. Well, there's two buildings, it's like 170 units, and they were built in like the 70s. So we're dealing with an older building, so there's all sort of maintenance considerations, but a lot of older residents as well. So we only started using resident WhatsApp groups. I think it was the year before last, or even last year. So that's the first step, is like, let's use WhatsApp, because everyone's kind of got on that. Even if your grandparents and your kids are living overseas, you've kind of got your head around that. So it shows it is possible. So it's that, and then we actually tried to run our first Zoom AGM last night, which was partially successful. We didn't get a quorum, so we couldn't get it done, but we're doing it next week. But it's kind of interesting because we're using the kind of free tools that are out there, and it kind of shows you that progression, and maybe people get used to it. So, and that might be a good starting point. Perhaps a WhatsApp group is useful. So again, maybe don't jump the gun. But then as it kind of firms up, people get their head around the idea. More formal solutions probably important. And then, like you said, I'll leave Wayne to talk about how you kind of ensure that can be integrated and flexible, I suppose.
Well, it's hard to say, let's say, how you future-proof your technology and how you can get, make sure that you're relevant in the future. One of the ways we do it from a software perspective is you work on languages that are heavily adopted, and there are a lot of resources around, because if you are building your own, let's just use an example of a community that is building their own technology. You've got to be cautious that the language that you built your system doesn't become archaic, because if it does, it becomes difficult to find resources to update your platform, and it will also become expensive and probably also have compatibility issues. And that's one of the big risks that you face when you build your own technology, is that you are at some point going to have to redevelop the whole platform, and that happens continuously if you're a technology company. So ideally, when you pick a solution, you want to pick a solution that has, let's say, a robust technology that you expect to be around in the next 10 years. Let's just put that out there, because often if you're licensing a solution, it is the company that you are licensing the solution from, it's their onus to upgrade the technology, make sure that the apps can go back on the iOS and Android stores when they have updates, etc. And I think the way that you future-proof your technologies, you just make sure that you're thinking forward. If you're building your own technology, that you're using a strong language for, to develop. And if you are licensing a solution, then the company that you find looks like they're forward thinking, are able to handle API integrations, because the reality is that there are some solutions that are made in an archaic language or archaic infrastructure, and they don't always offer the great benefits that can be received from PropTech adoption. So you've got to sort of do a little bit of research. You've got to have a clear understanding of where you and your community want to go, and then from that point in time, I think you can choose what makes sense to your community.
Absolutely, and I do. The language you use, the technology, and you do find that technology companies are continuously upgrading, updating, and staying in line with the current and international trends. Sean, when you mentioned WhatsApp group earlier, I could almost feel the collective sigh of our residential community managers. I think WhatsApp groups, although is a fantastic way to start getting your estate engaged, has end up being wildfires within your estate, as they're very difficult to manage. And I think that again brings us back to this app type based technology, where you are able to communicate through a more official channel, and so that your comments and concerns are noted and actually dealt with by the right people, and not the granny on the corner.
Yeah.
So
you have to be very brave to create a resident group that's communication both ways. So ours we use for announcements, but can be very entertaining, like my CPF group, and you see the convos Friday evening after 5, people had a glass of wine. Can be great for entertainment value, but perhaps not so effective.
I'm the chairperson of my association as well, and I find that there is an enormous number of photos of dog poos. I mean, it's like okay, so go around trying to work out which dog does that come from. But the absolutely, but I think it is about that formal line of communication, and that's where that application serves such an important role. Now, if you could, and Sean, if we could look as a trend advisor. Now, I know that I'm sure many trend or scenario people in the scenario industry were taken out at the knees when it came to the pandemic, and a lot of the trends and scenarios that you had anticipated probably didn't come to fruition, and others did. But if we look at what's happened, there has been obviously this moved away from touch screens and things like that, or touchless technologies. What do you see in this property technology space coming in the next few years that would be of benefit for residential communities?
Yeah, good question. I mean, there's some things, maybe there's larger trends that were happening before the pandemic, that will remain. Perhaps some things have kind of been influenced a bit. So I guess it's kind of in, short, medium term. Short term, it is that kind of focus around social distancing and additional hygiene. So like you said, touchless systems, perhaps, very simple on the simple scale is, sensor switches instead of physical switches. In buildings, there's often ways perhaps to measure traffic. I mean, in a complex, people have their units, it's different. Kind of thinking of an office building, you can kind of pick up monitoring occupancy is quite important, and perhaps high pedestrian traffic levels can be applicable sometimes, obviously in the residential setting. But just looking specifically for residential, I think it is perhaps improved communication is like a really big thing, that kind of tenant engagement aspect. And perhaps also within residential itself, more people working at home, there might you might need to think of additional measures or kind of management implications. Will people have more visitors? Do they need different services within the complex? That type of thing. So there's kind of, I think the use of perhaps residential is changing. So, that can have impacts on estate management. Also in terms of the facilities, amenities you offer, perhaps, like a kind of shared office space. I've seen it in some of the large developers doing that. So perhaps what you offer your residents is also changing, kind of maybe, complex is becoming a bit more mixed use. I mean, we've seen the community centers, community kind of dysfunction halls, or there's kind of expanded things. Sometimes you have, people offering dry cleaning, etc. So perhaps you see that element growing a bit more, so they become a bit more mixed use in a way. But that's kind of the product itself. A lot of things obviously changing, consumer demands. But at a high level in residential, I suppose you get, on the focus level, you get smart homes. So perhaps people have their homes linked up to systems where they can control, lighting or heating or access remotely. So that could be quite interesting if you have like a smart home system, and perhaps in some way that can plug into the overall scheme management system. Obviously not with specifics, but you could, for instance, you might be able to tell who's at home for like safety reasons, or if there's like a fire hazard, or for evacuation purposes. So there are some general themes, I suppose, that could, create ideas or what's the word, possibilities that we hadn't thought about before. So I think the kind of smart home, smart building segment of that really feeds into that. So, monitoring things through sensors is a big thing with utilities management.
Sean, can I just jump in on the utility side? So I agree. The IoT devices, if you're looking at trends internationally, IoT is a very strong trend that relates to, really the smart home concept. And to bring it to the South African market, we're seeing a lot. We have a platform called smartbuilding.mobi, and we're seeing a lot of people linking up their utilities, so their water and their electricity. And just from doing that, you can pick up leaks. When you've done that properly, you can, start to monitor your usage. And there is the possibility in this space, because a lot of data is coming from a lot of different devices, to have machine learning backends that will allow you to get like deeper insights. Now, machine learning or AI is one of these terms that people don't necessarily always get. You've got to be aware that garbage in is garbage out. That means if your data is not correct, then you're not going to get the right insights. But generally, I think that the biggest one of the, let's call them the fourth industrial revolution technologies that's going to impact the South African market over the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years will be IoT devices and that type of information integrated into our daily lives.
I would absolutely agree with you. I think 2 years ago when the experiment started happening with 5G, this was one of the things that the way in which we see data is changing, and the way in which we see devices, and how this can impact so many sides of our lives. And go back to what Sean's saying, we already are seeing that growth and development within what we call virtual municipalities, or virtual power hubs where states can share, or virtual grids where states can share power. We've got smart technology around smart metering and utilities, as you mentioned, communication, definitely, and the sensors. I mean, sensors will enable you to be able to stock the right type of food and drinks at your clubhouse, not without wasting stock, with access, what time is your busiest time at your gate, have extra staff available because you're able to monitor the times where there are more people coming in and out of your estate, etc. And we're coming to an end now, but I think to wrap it up, to talk about the analytics that you're able to pull from these types of digital solutions, and the power that can offer you within a community. You mentioned that obviously the information needs to be accurate, the information needs to be up to date. But just give us an example of a few of the types of analytics that can be pulled from these systems that could be of direct value and benefit for an estate manager, and how they run their community.
I just want to, because we're close to the end, there were a few questions in the thread, so I want to apply it to your question around analytics. First of all, there was a question on the database, who owns the database. But generally, it would be, let's say, the body corporate or the managing community, but it also can be contractual. It can be contractual with the service providers, meaning that you can agree to whatever you want to agree. And who's responsible for the security? That's the same story. It can be contractual, but generally it's the management of the community. On there were just a few other questions relating to that apps portal. Okay, so the thing is, I'm going to use the IoT device example. When you have a water leak, it's easy to see a burst, let's say, because you'll just have this excessive amount of use.
I'm sorry, Wayne, we're losing you there.
Leak. Can you hear me now?
Yes, just repeat. When you have a water leak?
When you have a water leak, a small leak, what you will notice between meter A and meter B, that there's always a little bit of water going out, so you can already pick up where the leak can be on the grid, which is something that you wouldn't pick up unless you did have the smart meters. You might have excess water usage, but you wouldn't notice that. You can also work out, there's so many things relating to, let's say the weather as a data set, and then your water and electricity usage. You might be able to pick up now that when it's hot, let's say you're using air conditioning, or once you can actually visualize your data. I'm just using that as a basic example because we can see the connectivity. But if you're able to see when usage happens and how much usage from certain, let's say users, you are able to make better calls for the community. For instance, if you're on some sort of shared water community usage, and now you can pick up the individual meters, you can see, well, it's disproportionate compared to your, to the way you build. So I'm just giving very basic examples of how you can use water, but theoretically, once you can pull the data with IoT devices, there's a lot of very interesting things that you can pick up.
Absolutely. Okay, so folks, 45 minutes is gone. Can you Can you believe it? The time goes so quickly. I would just like to say thank you so much to both of you for putting your time aside today and to discuss property technology with our communities. We will share this content, continue to share this content with them, and it's been very insightful. And we really appreciate all your input and all your time and your expert and your sharing of those expertise. To all of those who've attended today, thank you so much. We appreciate the ongoing support. We will be sharing this recording. It should be out by Monday, if not sooner, and that will be emailed through to you. If you have any more questions, please feel free to send them through to myself. I'll direct it to the folks. And this recording also includes the chat box, so we'll be able to pick up some of those questions and Wayne's answers. So thank you so much, Wayne, for addressing them. And enjoy the rest of your afternoon and your day. And thank you so much for attending with us today. Judy, you can pop that video on.